Holy City Center Radio, it is episode 328, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, January 10th, 2025. Happy birthday to my mom. Today is her birthday. I hope it's a great one for her. Miss you, Mom. Wish I was home celebrating with you, but glad I just saw you at Christmas. To everybody else, if it's not your birthday, happy birthday whenever that happens. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry for the break. Expected to have a normal week. Had an episode recorded, ready to roll, and everything looked great on my computer. And then when my producer extraordinaire, Lindsay, and myself separately tried to access the recording file, there was no sound. Everything looked normal, but no sound was playing. So needless to say, I was there's nothing worse than, and this has happened to me a handful of times over the 3-4 years I've been doing the podcast now, that an episode just doesn't record for whatever reason. Thankfully, it doesn't happen a lot, but every once in a blue moon it happens. And there's nothing worse than that in terms of the podcasting world, because there's nothing I want to do less than just repeat the entire episode I just did. It's not something I want to do. I would be a terrible actor, besides, putting aside the fact I don't have the talents to be an actor. But say I did, I would hate repeating things over and over and over again. Like I don't even want to do the episode over. So apologies that there was a little break. I'm sure you might not even noticed. But yes, back in Charleston, had a great time. As I mentioned, I believe on the last podcast, had a great time in Connecticut. Been happy to be back here in South Carolina. It's been a little chilly. I hope you guys have been staying warm. Nothing really exciting happening here besides podcast episodes not recording. But I do want to say that the Charleston City Paper has started taking nominations for the Best of Charleston Awards. They want you to reflect on 2024 and think about your favorites, people, places, things in Charleston. Nominate them in whatever category you feel like. You can do just one category and that's the end of it. You can nominate people in every single category, and there are hundreds if that's what you want to do. So we've talked about this before. If you spend any time in Charleston, you're aware of the City Paper Awards, I'm sure. I've been lucky enough for the last 11 years to win at least one award associated with Holy City Center. So hoping to continue that streak, but a little bit of bad news for me. They've basically, over the last 2 years, have gotten rid of all the categories that Holy City Center was, best suited for. So last year they dumped, after many, many years, the best local interest blog. I kind of got that. I think they launched that when blogs were kind of at their height, and it wasn't just, like what I do, which is really just talking about Charleston news and what's going on in town. But it was stuff like, if someone had a fitness blog or a foodie blog, a mommy blog, whatever, everybody had a certain kind of niche that they were talking about online. And I think that's kind of why they created that category. And then those blogs, even locally, they just started kind of disappearing as people moved or, decided to do things, kind of move that business model or whatever you want to call it to like TikTok or Instagram. So they did away with that category, which was the one that was, almost always a guarantee that Holy City Center would at least be nominated for. So I was a little bummed about that. It's nice to win awards and feel like people like what you're doing. But, whatever. There were some other categories. But then they also, this year, they did away with Best Local Instagram. So, okay, well, can't really do that anymore. They got rid of Best Social Media Influencer, which, even though I don't consider Holy City Center or myself to be a quote-unquote influencer, it's not really the realm that this whole thing is in. It was still like a decent enough fit. Well, they did away with that. They're instead doing Best Local foodie influencer and best local lifestyle influencer. So I've kind of moved away from blogs and Instagram to just kind of broad. However you are a quote unquote influencer, whatever platform or platforms you use, you could fit under these two categories, but they're pretty narrow. And I like to think Holy City Center does a lot more than just food and a lot more than just quote unquote lifestyle. It's all about Charleston. It's all those things and more. Unfortunately, those are kind of the best fit that are left. They also did away with Best Local Website this year, which, a lot of times was just won by the Charleston City Paper. Or, I think last year Live 5 News won, but Holy City Cinema get at least nominated. I think we're lucky enough to win it one year. They did away with that, which is kind of bizarre. I would understand if City Paper always won and they're like, all right, this is our awards. We don't really need to always be the winner here. But like I said, I had won once. Live 5 News won just last year. So there was some variety in there. But they did away with that. So that's another bummer. And so there's just not that like real perfect fit anymore for Holy City Center, which is a bummer. But, it's okay. Don't get me wrong, still love what I do. Certainly don't need any sort of award to continue doing it, but it was nice. It was fun. It was like for what I do, it was like my Oscars or my Grammys or whatever. It's the only thing Holy City Center is ever going to win anything for is this very hyper local awards that the alt paper, if you will, in the state puts on. So yeah, it is a little bit of a bummer, but not a big deal. But like I said, it can still fit into a couple categories, and there's one that it definitely can still fit into, and that's best local podcast. So Holy City Cinema Radio obviously could fit into that category. So if you want to nominate the show, I would be so grateful of that. And the link is in the show notes to help you do that. And then I mentioned the two influencer options that are out there now: foodie influencer, lifestyle influencer. Again, it's not quite a perfect fit, but yeah, Holy City Center, does talk about local food and restaurants and does talk about quote unquote lifestyle things that are going on in town. So not as nice of a fit as some of the old ones, but I think it makes sense to be a nominee in that category at least. And if you feel the same way, I would appreciate you putting Holy City Center in there. Maybe there's some other category you think Holy City Center or myself fits in. If you see the category like that, nominate. That's greatly appreciated. Those are the ones I just mentioned, though, seem to be the best and most appropriate fits for HCS. So I won't talk about it too much more. Just kind of want to give you an overview. Just like in the last handful of years, this is the nomination period. It's open, and I think until January 25th. And then they take the top, depending on how many nominees they get in each category, like something like the top 3 to 5. And then they will do final voting based on the top nominees. And so you'll be hearing me say nominate, nominate. And then when that's over, there's like a month or so where there's a break. And then I'll be asking you if I'm lucky enough to be nominated for anything to please go ahead and do that final vote. Anybody who's listened to the show in the past, you're familiar with this whole routine. So again, just would greatly appreciate any nominations that you feel are appropriate for Holy City Center. And it's a-okay if you don't believe it fits into those categories and there's someone else you want out there. I just appreciate your support in any way. So just listening is helpful. Also, I know some people get kind of jaded with the Best of Charleston. Some people believe you have to pay to win a category. I've never paid for anything, and I've won some awards, so I can only speak from my experience that truly the votes are what did it. I mean, unless there was someone at the city paper rigging it for me, which thank you if you're that person and did that. So I truly believe that a lot of the categories, at least, it really is it comes down to the votes, and it's really important on some of these categories. Now, some restaurants win every single year; they don't need the promotion. But there are some smaller, mom and pop shops, excuse me, or do-it-yourself people that aren't like this big restaurant chain or conglomerate that owns multiple properties or whatever. And even just being nominated can help out. And I'm speaking from experience again. My first year being a nominee, I didn't win any of the awards, but just being nominated boosted my numbers across the board of all the platforms I had at that time. We're talking 12 years ago now. I saw a jump in the amount of people visiting my site. I saw an unusual jump in followers on different platforms. And it truly does help, even if you don't ultimately win any award. It really does help because people, even if they don't vote for you, like, oh, what's this? I've never heard of this business before. I'm not going to vote for them, but I'll check them out. And so if you have friends, family, or you just know of someone doing an amazing job and they fit in one of these categories, definitely nominate them. Don't go for well, I know such and such is going to win because they win every year. If you truly believe there's someone else that deserves recognition, put them in there because it really does help, even if they don't ultimately win the final vote. So that's all I'll say about that. Again, I appreciate anyone who plugs Holy City Center into any of the categories. And no more of that. Let's get into the latest news. Convicted murderer Alex Murdaugh is back in the news, and he is not having a good time. He's lost another case and must pay millions of dollars in damages. Where that money will come from is a question I don't think any of us really have an answer to, or if that money even exists at this point. But a judge ordered Murdaugh to pay Nautilus Insurance $14.8 million for an insurance scheme that involved the family of his former housekeeper. So, as a refresher, the Murdaugh family had a housekeeper by the name of Gloria Satterfield. Details are a little murky, but somehow she fell down some steps, off of the front porch of, I believe, the infamous property now, Moselle, where the murders took place. But I could be wrong. It may have been a different property, and I'm not going to look it up. So you do your own research. No, she fell, sustained some injuries. I think most significantly a head injury, and died ultimately. Murdaugh told her family that, hey, this is why I have insurance. I have insurance on this property. It will cover this whole thing. Let me handle it for you. So ultimately, there was an insurance payout of $3.8 million, and he just pocketed that himself. He never gave it to the Satterfield family. So that's what this is all stems from, if you needed a refresher. And also, if you need a refresher on the other crimes, Murdaugh is serving 2 life sentences right now in a South Carolina prison for murdering his wife and son. In addition to that, he was also sentenced to 40 years in federal prison for his financial crimes, such as this kind of insurance scheme, and he bilked other people out of lots and lots of money. So that's where we're at right now. He's lost another case. Now, the murder case and the other financial crimes that are not the other financial crimes, meaning not talking about this insurance scheme, the ones that he was already convicted or sentenced on. He is appealing both of those in different manners, and we're still kind of trying to get more information on that. As of right now, these appeals that he has are still out there, and I'll be sure to provide any updates on those as they move forward. And also, if there's any other lawsuits that pop up, although I believe this was the last one that was expected. All right. It's January. It's a new year. You may have noticed over the last handful of days, whether on the federal level or down, there's been the swearing in of new members of, whether it's Congress, again, on the federal level, state level, maybe it's a local school board, city council, town council, whatever it is, everybody's getting sworn in. Some, of course, reelected, and there's some new folks who won, for the first time, say. And so that's been happening. And that means, yes, they're about to get back to work. Politicians, they do take some time off. Their legislative session isn't quite like your normal job for many reasons, but they have a time off where there's really no movement on bills. Nothing's happening, at that time. So that means, yep, they're about to get back to work, which means a bunch of bills are going to come up. They're going to be discussed. Some will move forward, of course, some will not. And the Charleston City Paper put together a really helpful list of bills that are likely to be discussed in some fashion. Some have a lot of support, others not as much. And I encourage you to visit the link in the show notes where they will go over that you can read that over rather and get all the details. I'm going to give you just like quick, hey, just put this little bug in your ear. I know that's not the saying. I couldn't think, but just so okay, yep, I know this might be discussed, and some of these might be very important to you. Others maybe not. But just to give you a heads up of what might be discussed, what may come up this legislative session, and perhaps you want to reach out to your local legislators to let them know what you think about these. So again, just putting this little thing out there for you. But definitely, if any of these, pique your interest or you're concerned about, the City Paper has a lot more details. And I also will be providing you with the bill numbers, so you can look them up if you want to see the bill in its entirety. So first, we're going to discuss bills that the City Paper says has popular support. Now that means popular support from politicians specifically, but may also have support from people in the community. The first one is school vouchers. That is one that has been talked about a lot, not just here in South Carolina, but in other states, and really it's been discussed on the federal level as well. This is a Senate bill, number 62, Senate, so you can just put in like South Carolina S62 bill or something like that. And it should bring you right to the website where you can read the bill in its entirety. The gist of this is that uh, I mean, let's be honest. It's the Republicans who are pushing for the school vouchers. So I'm just going to say Republicans want, but there may be a Democrat or two that support this, and of course, there's going to be Republicans that don't. But the Republicans do have a super majority here in South Carolina. So this is basically a program that would use state lottery dollars to fund a program where parents can get a certain amount of money that they can put towards, say their kid going to a private school. So those public funds would be used to benefit private schools. That's the gist of it. Again, you can go look up people why they support it, why they don't, and kind of make your own opinion on it if you want. But that is certainly something we'll be hearing about. Sticking in schools, there is another Senate Bill 30 that is talking about raising teacher pay. I think that's something a lot of people, I would hope a majority, believe teachers deserve to be paid more in this state. And hopefully we'll see that happen. So that is a bill that might be discussed. I've certainly talked about this on the podcast many, many times, and it was so close to being passed last year. And if it wasn't for just one person who wanted to, they used like a procedural move that essentially killed this bill for last session. It's the hate crimes bill, which is currently called the Senator Clementa C. Pinckney Hate Crimes Act. It was so close in the last session. Hopefully, it'll get pushed across this time. South Carolina is one of only 2 states that does not have any hate crimes laws on the books. Wyoming's the other state. Really, really hoping this one gets passed finally, and we will no longer be on that list with Wyoming. And hopefully, Wyoming passes their own version. I have no clue what the state of the discussion in that state is, but hopefully at least South Carolina's will get across the finish line. Another Senate Bill 51. This is going to involve what the city paper lists as a nuclear restart. So you may remember the 2017 collapse of the VC Summer Nuclear Power Project, which ultimately ended up with several utility officials being sent to prison or paying big fines. And it unfortunately left ratepayers on the hook for $9 billion. Nah, that's billion dollars. So it was a big debacle. If you're unfamiliar, again, search it out. There's a lot of stories out there. So there's talk that this is going to be restarted to allow the state to generate, power. We need power, and they're hoping to get this back up and running, this plan, and do a better job than they did in the past. This particular bill would direct state-owned utility company by the name of Santee Cooper, I'm sure you're familiar, to invite proposals from private companies to complete the project using non-public funds. So we'll see if that gets in play. I would imagine it does because, again, this is about generating power for the state, which obviously is needed. And yes, I know we have power, but this is something that officials believe we're going to need as the state continues to grow. The next one is House Bill 3184. And unfortunately, it seems, again, with the supermajority that Republicans have, this has a lot of support. It is an attempt to put a ban on any diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yes, DEI is what you've probably heard people yelling about on the cable TV or, your Bro Universe podcasts, where people claim that diversity, equity, inclusion, which is either a full-on department that companies will add, or it's a program that companies will add that tries to make up for the inherent biases and problems, not just in the past, but even still to this day, where it's very difficult for minorities of any type, whether we're talking about in the workplace, certain businesses, women could be of any race could be considered a minority because all the higher ups are all men. This could be about a race. This could be about a gender identity. Basically, if you're not a straight white male, there's a lot of businesses in companies that have not done a good job in their hiring practices of being diverse. Now, opponents will say DEI forces companies to hire people who are not qualified just because of the color of their skin or their gender identity, their sex, their whatever, their gender. That's not actually what DEI is supposed to do. It's supposed to ensure that people who are qualified, who in the past would be ignored because they're a minority, that they're not being ignored and that they're getting a fair shake. It doesn't mean they're guaranteed a job. It just means that people who maybe didn't get an interview in the past or were, for whatever reason, or did get an interview but were passed over, these are programs that are meant to fix those issues. And just like anything involving minorities, Republicans are fighting it, whether it's DEI, whether it's quote unquote CRT, which, critical race theory not being taught in schools, but people claiming it is, uh, LGBTQ issues and education, anything that is not the quote unquote norm uh, gets attacked. And so this is what that is. Don't get me wrong, there have been a lot of companies who have tried to implement DEI departments and programs, and they did not do a good job. So this is not to say that all these programs are working or doing what they're supposed to, but there are some that are working appropriately. And this is an attempt for any DEI training, any DEI statements, and any really consideration of diversity issues in admissions or employment decisions would be banned. And the last bill that the city paper believes has a lot of support is Senate Bill 14. This is a tax free baby formula piece of legislation. So, under current law, South Carolina exempts several types of goods and services, including things like unprepared food and prescription medicines. Those types of things are exempt from the state's 6% sales tax. Under this bill, baby formula and baby food also would be added to the list. So, seems like a good idea to me. I don't know what the back end result would be losing those tax dollars, but come on, let's stop making it as expensive as possible for people to get things that they need. And formula and baby food, babies shouldn't be struggling. Parents should be able to afford those things, and if taking away the sales tax will help them, that sounds like a good thing to me. Now on to some bills that you may hear talked about. You may have a certain segment of the state house trying to push it, but it might not get through. First is House Bill 3537. This is the death penalty for abortion bill. It's exactly what it sounds like. Basically, it would determine that life begins at conception. And if that pregnancy gets terminated at any point, knowingly terminated, I should say, uh, people, and I say people because it could be the mother, could be the father, could be both, it could be a doctor, it could be all three of these people. Anybody who has had any part in an abortion could be charged with murder, and obviously any penalties if they're convicted would fit. And in this state, we have the death penalty for murder. So someone who has an abortion, they would be could be charged with murder. If they're convicted, they could be sent to death. So that's what that bill is about. Now, we know that there is a strong support for abortion, basically an abortion ban in the state. That's why South Carolina has the 6-week limit, which is basically a ban. But there has been pushback, even in the Republican Party, about anything that goes further than that. So that's why this shouldn't really move forward, or at least not all the steps. Maybe the House passes it, because the House always seems to be a little bit crazier than the Senate. I mean that on the federal level and state level. So it may, but it doesn't seem like it's going to cross the finish line, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Another one is House Bill 3498. This talks about no income tax up to $1 million. So there would be no income tax for anyone who's earned up to $1 million. And once you pass that $1 million, you're subject to income tax. So again, I don't know what the background of losing that tax revenue, what that would mean for the state. But obviously, I like the idea of not having an income tax, as I certainly am not making $1 million. So we'll see what happens there. There definitely needs to be some more information about the effects of this and what that would mean. The next bill is House Bill 3018. This is the medical marijuana for veterans with PTSD bill. South Carolina almost passed a medical cannabis piece of legislation last session, but it was ultimately sidelined. And this isn't a legalization, and nor was last year, legalization of cannabis, period. It was specifically for medical issues, and it didn't pass. Now, this one is specifically for medical issues as it relates to veterans with PTSD specifically. So if you have another condition where in other states you may be eligible for medical cannabis, you would not be under this bill even if it passes. So it's obviously one of the most restrictive cannabis legalization laws in the country, as it would be very specific to who has access to it and what they need to be diagnosed with to have it. So even though this is incredibly restrictive, it is not even close to legalizing it, period, which South Carolina has showed, at least the legislators have showed no interest in doing. This is very specific, and it still doesn't have a ton of support. But we'll see if that changes. House Bill 3377. This is a voter referendum on Medicaid expansion. Governor Henry McMaster and the Republican supermajority in both chambers of our legislature, they do not want Medicaid to be expanded. However, Representative Cambrell Garvin, a Democrat from Richland, has been pushing this piece of legislation that would allow voters to have, a little bit of their say. Basically, voters could say if they wanted to expand Medicaid in the state. Unfortunately, even if they overwhelmingly say they want it, this is a non-binding advisory referendum. So basically, even if the vast majority of the state says we want to expand Medicaid to help more people out in the state, the legislators still decide if they want to move it forward or not. So it might just be a futile effort where they're like, yeah, sure, whatever, do it. And even if their people in their district, their constituents say we want this, that doesn't mean they're going to do it. So we'll see what happens there. Two more bills to go. House Bill 3095. This is a bill that would not allow gender changes on birth certificates. As I said, this goes back to anything involving any form of minority in this country is constantly under attack. And this is part of the LGBTQ, specifically the transgender panic that's been going on with a certain segment of our population over the last few years. This would ban, like I said, there'd be no gender changes allowed on birth certificates in the state. Thankfully, it doesn't seem to really have any strong backing at this point, but again, something to keep an eye on. And the last one is House Bill 3625. This is a sports betting bill. There's been some support. Some states, a lot of states actually, are starting to get on board with this, allowing gambling legally in their state on sports. This bill specifically would legalize mobile phone-based sports gambling. It died in the last session, and it may come back up. Obviously, supporters note that our nearby neighbor in North Carolina has brought in about $100 million in sports gambling tax revenues since they instituted this legalized sports gambling in their state about 9 months ago. But opponents are pointing to studies that show that gambling rates rise dramatically after such laws are passed. Not just gambling rates, I should say severe problem gambling rates, which makes sense, of course. If you don't have sports betting, then you add it. Obviously, it's going to be easier to gamble, and there's going to be people who get in trouble. So we'll see what happens there. But again, at this point, it doesn't seem to have a whole lot of support. So that's what we're looking at. That's what you should prepare mentally for going into the new session. How many of those will come up? We'll see. I'll be sure to keep you posted. Let's stick with our local legislators and all their infinite wisdom that they have. And so our next story involves them. There is an outside audit that is taking place to try to figure out where that $1.8 billion that is sitting in a state-run account, where that came from, where it's supposed to be, and just any details at all about this thing. Well, the audit has been delayed. So the South Carolina Department of Administration's executive director, whose name is Marsha Adams, she wrote to Governor Henry McMaster that the report from outside auditors that was originally due on December 31st would not be sent to the governor's desk until January 15th. So we've still got a little less than a week now before hopefully we'll have a report on where the heck all this money came from, where it's supposed to be, where it should be going, just anything on this account. If you're wondering, yeah, hiring an outside audit is not cheap. We, as a state, spent $3 million for the outside forensic auditor to come in and determine whether this $1.8 billion actually exists, where the money is supposed to go, and how it went unreported for years. The money, for those who don't remember, was found in what's called a flow through account, which was created when the state switched accounting systems. So somehow, when they were switching accounting systems, this money ended up in this account. It was forgotten about, was unknown. They just don't. They simply just don't know. It was just discovered last year that, hey, we've got this account with the state that has almost $2 billion in it, and no one really knows why. So hopefully, this review, which, by the way, it includes examining accounting entries for multiple state funds and accounts over the course of nearly a decade, which explains why this is probably taking so long. That review will hopefully be settled here, like I said, in less than a week at this point, and we'll have some answers as to what the hell happened here. For those wondering, the firm that is looking into it is a consulting firm based out of Washington, D.C. The company's name is Alix Partners, ALIX Partners. They were hired in July to conduct this review. So hopefully next week we'll have more details, and I'll be sure to share them. And our last piece of news before the weekend, we're going to stay with some legislation. Just like new members of, again, Congress, House of Representatives, school boards, whatever it is, are getting sworn in, some new laws take effect when the new year starts. One such law that took effect here in South Carolina specifically involves adult entertainment websites. Yes, we're talking about pornography, people. Multiple websites have begun restricting access to users in the Palmetto State with what is called an age verification law. Officially came on the books on January 1. The law was sponsored by State Rep Travis Moore, a Republican from Spartanburg. Its official name is the 2024 Child Online Safety Act, and it was designed to restrict minors' access to pornographic content online. They do this by requiring anyone who runs one of these sites, or whatever platform it may be on, to use quote-unquote commercially reasonable methods of using public or private transactional data to verify users' ages. Methods for verifying ages can include everything from these so-called digitized identification cards to independent third-party age verification systems that are used by businesses or government agencies to verify users were above the age of 18. The punishment for this, any website that fails to vet the ages of its users, who were then eventually able to access any adult content, could be found criminally liable and sued for damages. Now, obviously, minors, people under the age of 18, should not have unfettered access to pornography. This legislation makes sense. And unsurprisingly, it easily passed through the legislature. But there have been some concerns that were raised. So I think a lot of people, I would hope everybody, but you know how these things are, everyone agrees that the spirit of this legislation is a good thing. We shouldn't be allowing anyone under the age of 18 to be accessing that type of content. However, there were some concerns raised when the bill was being discussed and debated last winter. Multiple online advocacy organizations warned our local lawmakers that these age verification policies could potentially present significant privacy concerns for anyone in this state, and it could also potentially violate federal protections for anonymous speech on the internet. Others, including members of the state Senate staff, believe it or not, suggested that the legislation could potentially fail to pass constitutional muster under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Ultimately, of course, the lawmakers decided none of that mattered. They're going to pass this bill and they'll deal with any consequences as it relates to constitutionality later. Now, look, the whole free speech aspect, the First Amendment, I think there might be that's a little tougher to argue, and who would want to be the person who tries to get rid of this legislation on that basis? Because even if it's in good faith, you don't want to be the person who's like, hey, this keep kids away from porn bill, not for me. You don't want to be that person. But I think there are legitimate concerns about privacy, because I don't know how these age verification systems work. I would imagine some you would likely have to like put in details, if not like upload a photo of your ID. I would guess like your driver's license. I don't know how else you verify your age without some kind of official, government issued document. I don't. And this is my own bad for not, Googling this, and I also didn't really want this in my Google history. But I would imagine there has to be something in that realm, which means your information's out there just like any other information you put on the internet, and could potentially, get out. A hacker could target some of these sites, which I would imagine not all of them have very good privacy settings, or good website security or whatever, and your information could get out there. Not just your name and your email, which sometimes you hear about these data breaches, and it's your name and your email get out there. Not great, but not horrible. But if this involves social security numbers or driver's license numbers, obviously your date of birth is going to be part of that, which again, I'm sure there's been lots of data breaches where that's out there. But my point is more, this is another chance for potentially your information to get in the hands of people who shouldn't have it. And if you're verifying ages, my concern is that there'll be some documents, like I said, like whether it's your driver's license or maybe a birth certificate. I have no idea how this is going to work. That's a lot of really important information that should be protected that's out there. Now, again, I'm not going to be the guy who says, hey, this Child Online Safety Act, we need to repeal it because I'm worried that, people's identities might potentially be stolen. This is certainly something that needs to be looked into. And if there's a way to still try to prevent minors for accessing content they shouldn't, I mean, obviously we need to do that, but maybe there's a way to do that to ensure that these privacy concerns, are something that can be removed. Regardless, if there is any change to that, I'll be sure to let you know. Again, the spirit of the law, obviously a good thing. But it could potentially get interesting if someone decides to challenge it based on its constitutionality. That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. I know this episode's a little longer, but we didn't have any other episodes this week because of the recording debacle, and it's a whole thing, as you know. Thank you for listening. If you made it this far, please support Holy City Center either by voting, or at this point nominating Holy City Center in the Charleston City Paper's Best of Charleston 2025 awards. You can also support Holy City Center in this podcast by rating, reviewing, liking, and subscribing on whatever platform you're currently listening to the show on. You can also go that extra mile by going to patreon.com/Holy City Center. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. I'll be back with you next week, pending any changes in the schedule or user error when it comes to recording, which I'm sure was my fault somehow. But already looking forward to talking to you all again. But until then, good night and good luck.